The 12 Chairs by Ilfent Petrov, Chapter 38, Up in the Clouds. 3 days after the concessionaire's deal with Mechnikov the Fitter, the Columbus Theater left by railway via Machakakala and Baku. The whole of these 3 days, the concessionaires, frustrated by the contents of the 2 chairs opened on Mashuk, waited for Mechnikov to bring them the third of the Columbus chairs. But the Narzan-tortured fitter converted the whole of the 20 rubles into the purchase of plain vodka and drank himself into such a state that he was kept locked up in the props room.
"That's mineral waters for you," said Ostap when he heard about the theater's departure. "A useful fool, that fitter. Catch me having dealings with theater people after this."
Ostap's became much more nervy than before. The chances of finding the treasure had increased infinitely.
"We need money to get to Vladikavkaz," said Ostap. "From there we'll drive by car to Tiflis along the Georgian military highway. Gorgeous scenery, magnificent views, wonderful mountain air. And at the end of it all, 150,000 rubles, 00 kopecks. There is some point in continuing the hearing."
But it was not quite so easy to leave Mineral Waters. Vorobianinov proved to have absolutely no talent for bilking the railway, and so when all attempts to get him aboard a train had failed, he had to perform again in the Flower Garden, this time as an educational district ward. This was not at all a success. 2 rubles for 12 hours hard and degrading work, though it was a large enough sum for the fare to Vladikavkaz. At Beslan, Ostap, who was traveling without a ticket, was thrown off the train, and the smooth operator impudently ran behind it for a mile or so, shaking his fist at the innocent Ippolit Matveyevich. Soon after, Ostap managed to jump onto a train slowly making its way to the Caucasian Ridge. From his position on the steps, Ostap surveyed with great curiosity the panorama of the mountain range that unfolded before him. It was between 3 and 4 in the morning. The mountaintops were lit by dark pink sunlight. Ostap did not like the mountains.
"Too showy," he said. "Weird kind of beauty, an idiot's imagination, no use at all."
At Vladikavkaz station, the passengers were met by a large open bus belonging to the Transcaucasian Car Hire and Manufacturing Society, and nice kind people said, "Those traveling by the Georgian military highway will be taken into the town free."
"Hold on, pussy," said Ostap. "We want the bus. Let them take us free."
When the bus had given him a lift to the center of the town, however, Ostap was in no hurry to put his name down for a seat in a car. Talking enthusiastically to Ippolit Matveyevich, he gazed admiringly at the view of the cloud-enveloped Table Mountain, but finding that it really was like a table, promptly retired. They had to spend several days in Vladikavkaz. None of their attempts to obtain money for the road fare met with any success, nor provided them with enough money to buy food. An attempt to make the citizens pay 10 kopek bits failed. The mountain ridge was so high and clear that it was not possible to charge for looking at it. It was visible from practically every point, and there were no other beauty spots in Vladikavkaz. There was the Terek, which flowed past the Trek, but the town charged for entry to that without Ostap's assistance. The alms collected in 2 days by Ippolit Matveyevich only amounted to 13 kopecks.
"There's only one thing to do," said Ostap. "We'll go to Tiflis on foot. We can cover the 100 miles in 5 days. Don't worry, Dad. The mountain view is delightful and the air is bracing. We only need money for bread and salami sausage. You can add a few Italian phrases to your vocabulary or not, as you like, but by evening you've got to collect at least 2 rubles. We won't have a chance to eat today, dear chum. Alas, what bad luck."
Early in the morning, the partners crossed the little bridge across the Terek River, went around the barracks, and disappeared deep into the green valley along which ran the Georgian military highway.
"We're in luck, pussy," said Ostap. "It rained last night, so we won't have to swallow the dust. Breathe in the fresh air, Marshal. Sing something. Recite some Caucasian poetry and behave as befits the occasion."
But Ippolit Matveyevich did not sing or recite poetry. The road went uphill. The nights spent in the open made themselves felt by pains in his side and heaviness in his legs, and the salami sausage made itself felt by a constant and griping indigestion. He walked along, holding in his hand a 5-pound loaf of bread wrapped in newspaper, his left foot dragging slightly. On the move again, but this time toward Tiflis, this time along the most beautiful road in the world. Ippolit Matveyevich could not have cared less. He did not look around him as Ostap did. He certainly did not notice the Terek, which now could just be heard rumbling at the bottom of the valley. It was only the ice-capped mountain-tops glistening in the sun which somehow reminded him of a cross between the sparkle of diamonds and the best brocade coffins of Bezenchuk the Undertaker. After Balta, the road entered and continued as a narrow ledge cut in the dark overhanging cliff. The road spiraled upwards, and by evening the concessionaires reached the village of Lars, about 3,000 feet above sea level. They passed the night in a poor native hotel without charge, and were even given a glass of milk each for delighting the owner and his guests with card tricks. The morning was so glorious that Ippolit Matveyevich, braced by the mountain air, began to stride along more cheerfully than the day before. Just behind Lars rose the impressive rock wall of the Bokovoy Ridge. At this point, the Terek Valley closed up into a series of narrow gorges. The scenery became more and more somber, while the inscriptions on the cliffs grew more frequent. At the point where the cliffs squeezed the Terek's flow between them, to the extent that the span of the bridge was no more than 10 feet, the concessionaires saw so many inscriptions on the side of the gorge that Ostap forgot the majestic sight of the Daryel Gorge and shouted out, trying to drown the rumble and rushing of the Terek.
Great people! Look at that, Marshal! Do you see it? Just a little higher than the cloud and slightly lower than the eagle. An inscription which says Mickey and Mike, July 1914. An unforgettable sight. Notice the artistry with which it was done. Each letter is 3 feet high and they used oil paints. Where are you now, Nicky and Mike? Pussy, continued Ostap, let's record ourselves for prosperity too. I have some chalk, by the way. Honestly, I'll go up and write Pussy and Aussie were here.
And without giving it much thought, Ostap put down the supply of sausage on the wall separating the road from the seething depths of the Terek and began clambering up the rocks. At first, Ippolit Matveyevich watched the smooth operator's ascent, but then lost interest and began to survey the base of Tamara's castle, which stood on a rock like a horse's tooth. Just at this time, about a mile away from the concessionaires, Father Theodore entered the Daryel Gorge from the direction of Tifels. He marched along like a soldier with his eyes as hard as diamonds, fixed ahead of him, supporting himself on a large crook. With his last remaining money, Father Theodore had reached Tifels and was now walking home subsisting on charity. While crossing the Cross Gap, he had been bitten by an eagle. Father Theodore hit out at the insolent bird with his crook and continued on his way. As he went along, intermingling with the clouds, he muttered,
Not for personal gain, but for the wishes of my wife who sent me.
The distance between the enemies narrowed. Turning a sharp bend, Father Theodore came across an old man in a gold pince-nez. The gorge split asunder before Father Theodore's eyes. The Terek stopped its 1,000-year roar. Father Theodore recognized Vorobyaninov. After the terrible fiasco in Batumi, after all his hopes had been dashed, this new chance of gaining riches had an extraordinary effect on the priest. He grabbed Ippolit Matveyevich by his scraggy Adam's apple, squeezed his fingers together, and shouted hoarsely, What have you done with the treasure that you slew your mother-in-law to obtain? Ippolit Matveyevich, who had not been expecting anything of this nature, said nothing, but his eyes bulged so far that they almost touched the lenses of his pince-nez. Speak, ordered the priest. Repent, you sinner! Vorobyaninov felt himself losing his senses. Suddenly, Father Theodore caught sight of Bender leaping from rock to rock. The technical advisor was coning down, shouting at the top of his voice, Against the Samba rocks they dash, those waves they foam and splash. A terrible fear gripped Father Theodore. He continued mechanically holding the marshal by the throat, but his knees began to knock.
Well, of all people, cried Ostap in a friendly tone, the rival concern.
Father Theodore did not dally. Obeying his healthy instinct, he grabbed the concessionaire's bread and sausage and fled. Hit him, Comrade Bender, cried Ippolit Matveyevich, who was sitting on the ground recovering his breath. Catch him! Stop him! Ostap began whistling and whooping.
Woo-woo, he warbled, starting in pursuit. The Battle of the Pyramids or Bender goes hunting. Where are you going, client? I can offer you a well-gutted chair.
This persecution was too much for Father Theodore, and he began climbing up a perpendicular wall of rock. He was spurred on by his heart, which was in his mouth, and an itch in his heels known only to cowards. His legs moved over the granite by themselves, carrying their master aloft.
Whoa, whoa,
yelled Ostap from below. Catch him, he's taken our supplies, breached Vorobyaninov, running up.
Stop, roared Ostap. Stop, I tell you.
But this only lent new strength to the exhausted priest. He wove about, making several leaps, and finally ended 10 feet above the highest inscription.
Give back our sausage, howled Ostap. Give back the sausage, you fool, and we'll forget everything.
Father Theodore no longer heard anything. He found himself on a flat ledge onto which no man had ever climbed before. Father Theodore was seized by a sickening dread. He realized he could never get down again by himself. The cliff face dropped vertically to the road. He looked below. Ostap was gesticulating furiously, and the marshal's gold pince-nez glittered at the bottom of the gorge.
I'll give back the sausage, cried the Holy Father, only get me down.
He could see all the movements of the concessionaires. They were running about below, and judging from their gestures, swearing like troopers. An hour later, lying on his stomach and peering over the edge, Father Theodore saw Bender and Vorobyaninov going off in the direction of the cross gap. Night fell quickly. Surrounded by pitch darkness and deafened by the infernal roar, Father Theodore trembled and wept up in the very clouds. He no longer wanted earthly treasures, he only wanted one thing, to get down onto the ground. During the night he howled so loudly that at times the sound of the Terek was drowned, and when morning came he fortified himself with sausage and bread and roared with demoniac laughter at the cars passing underneath. The rest of the day was spent contemplating the mountains and that heavenly body, the sun. The next night he saw the Tsaritsa Tamara. She came flying over to him from her castle and said coquettishly, "Let's be neighbors."
"Mother," said Father Theodore with feeling, "not for personal gain."
I know, observed the Tsaritsa, but merely at the wishes of your wife who sent you."
"How did you know?"
asked the astonished priest. "I just know. Why don't you stop by, neighbor? We'll play 66. What about it?" She gave a laugh and flew off, letting off firecrackers into the night sky as she went. The day after, Father Theodore began preaching to the birds. For some reason he tried to sway them towards Lutheranism.
"Birds," he said in a sonorous voice, "repent your sins publicly."
On the fourth day he was pointed out to tourists from below. "On the right we have Tamara's castle," explained the experienced guides, "and on the left is a live human being, but it is not known what he lives on or how he got there." "My, what a wild people!" exclaimed the tourists in amazement. "Children of the mountains." Clouds drifted by. Eagles cruised above Father Theodore's head. The bravest of them stole the remains of the sausage and with its wings swept 1.5 pounds of bread into the foaming Terek. Father Theodore wagged his finger at the eagle and, smiling radiantly, whispered,
"God's bird does not know either toil or unrest. He leisurely builds his long-lasting nest."
The eagle looked sideways at Father Theodore, squawked cock-a-doodle-doo, and flew away.
"Oh, eagle, you bitch of a bird!"
10 days later, the Vladikavkaz Fire Brigade arrived with suitable equipment and brought Father Theodore down. As they were lowering him, he clapped his hands and sang in a tuneless voice,
"And you will be queen of all the world, my lifelong friend."
And the rugged Caucasus re-echoed Rubinstein's setting of the Lermontov poem many times.
"Not for personal gain, but merely at the wishes,"
Father Theodore told the fire chief. The cackling priest was taken on the end of a fire ladder to the psychiatric hospital.